Orda, Pawb, good morning everybody. If you weren't on the first session, I was just going to go over what this morning is about. We have the theme of human needs are met on day 3 of the Wales Biodiversity Conference 2022. My name's Natalie Buttress and I'm the Director of Wales for Coed, the Woodland Trust in Wales, and I'll be facilitating and chairing this next session. Actually, we have 3 great sessions, one that we've just had, which is pre-recorded if you didn't catch that one, so you can catch up on the website, about our living legends, our ancient trees and hedges. But this next session is about achieving wellbeing goals through tree and woodland strategies, particularly focusing on urban tree cover and its benefits as well as its challenges. So I'll be introducing the panel in just a second. And we also have after the session, Wildfire, good and bad fire. So that's more about the challenges, working with people and communities on risks to woodland and other natural habitats. But just to let you know that if you just joined us, we do use the chat for any questions. We'll have some presentations first in this session, followed by a question and answer session. So if you have any comments or questions, keep those to the end and we'll make sure we'll hopefully be able to cover all the questions there. We've got moderators in the background that are feeding those through to me. We've also got more details of the speakers' biographies on the website, so please do go and look at this session and get some more information about the speakers. And as I say, the session is recorded, so it will be available afterwards if need be, if you have to pop out or have IT problems or what have you. So moving on to this session then, so achieving wellbeing goals through tree and woodland strategies. This is really about understanding the value of trees to people, and I have with me today a great panel of speakers. Catherine Natgan, who's the Urban Programme Lead for the Woodland Trust, but previously was Tree Officer for Sheffield and has been a Community Forest Manager and lots of project experience connecting people to nature. We also have Rachel Penman with us today, who's representing Wrexham Council and is Head of Service for Environment. And there's also going to be a video from the Chief Executive of Wrexham, Ian Bancroft. And then we have Nerys Jones, who's a green space consultant with a background in urban forestry and green infrastructure strategy from a local to an international level. So a wealth of experience there. So if I may, could I start with Catherine, who's going to give us a presentation on her experience with Sheffield. So Catherine, there you are. If I could pass over to you and run through your experiences at Sheffield. Thank you.
Right, let me just stop presenting that. Hang on a sec. Yes, hello everyone. My name's Catherine Nutchins. I'm the Urban Programme Lead for the Woodland Trust. I'm just sorting out my slideshow because for some reason it started halfway through. There we go. Let's can you see that currently?
Not at the moment, Catherine.
Okay, yeah, let me try that then. Right, are we there?
Yeah, we can see that now. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so I was the community forestry manager at Sheffield for 3 years before this, and then previous to that a tree officer. Community forestry was all about planting trees with communities, really. But I thought I'd just take you through a little bit about Sheffield and kind of what happens in recent history. So here we have lovely Sheffield. It is an extremely wooded city because of the heritage. It has the steel and iron heritage, and these woodlands around the city fueled. They provide the charcoal for all that iron smelting and steel works and the forges and everything. So you can see that we've got quite a lot of ancient woodlands down in the south, but also in the the less affluent north, in those industrial areas. Think those full Monty areas. We've got all the woodland there as well, and then this line here, the yellow line, is the Peak District, and then we've got plantation woodland out in the Peak as well. So it's a really wooded city. 4.5 million trees, 12 trees per person. I think that's certainly the most wooded city in the UK if not, you know, wider Europe. Who knows? We know it's a lot. There's a lot of trees in Sheffield. So in order to manage all those trees, we need a big team, and this is the team circa well, it's this time last year basically. This is the Trees and Woodlands team. We've got the two woodland officers that manage all the woodland, the peak woodland, the ancient woodland, the modern woodland. We've got all the tree officers that, you know, are managing the tree risks, things like ash dieback and, you know, all those woodland paths and trees in parks, trees in schools, and the community forestry team that are planting trees with a lot of schools and communities and everything like that. Community forestry has actually been around for 20 years and was mentioned in Trees in Towns too. So it's not a new thing. It's something that Sheffield's already done. So the trees that they don't manage, however, are the street trees. They are managed by the highways section. So in 2012, there was an opportunity. Sheffield basically was a mess. The streets were full of potholes. It had been massively underfunded. It was dreadful. I mean, I remember just thinking how awful it was. And they were, and basically the council were told that they would get £1 billion investment in the roads from the central government if they signed up to a PFI project. It was a 25-year project. The street trees were part of it. They would have lovely smooth pavements. They could replace all those big trees that everyone complains about with lots more little ones. And, you know, and hopefully everyone would be happy. Now, because, you know, people are a bit fed up with experts, you know, someone once said that, it was decided not to consult the Trees and Woodlands team, but actually to perhaps decide it themselves, because it would slow things up and, you know, and hopefully everyone would be happy with that. Well, obviously they weren't. You know, it was very difficult for everybody in Sheffield that cared about the trees. It really damaged the reputation. I mean, you can go and have a look at what happened online if you want. You know, it was a massive problem. The council, unfortunately, were really stuck because they couldn't. To change the contract would cost vast amounts of money, so they stuck with trying to carry on with it as long as they possibly could. And eventually, I think the police dropped out and they had to move over. So eventually, it led to the change of the council structure from a strong leader model, which was entirely Labour led, to this what's it called, the committee model, where now everyone, it's much more shared. It's more democratic, but it does take a longer time if you're a council officer. So yes, it had a massive impact on Sheffield. Some of the things that would benefit, some of the silver linings, since we are in fact talking about well-being here, was not one but two Trees and Woodland strategies were given the green light. So Parks and Countryside, our Trees and Woodlands team, we've been pushing for one for years. We finally got one based on the Wrexham one, the old Wrexham one, which certainly we had a good look at Wrexham when we were putting it together, and also the Sheffield Street Tree Partnership, which was the Woodland Trust, the Wildlife Trust, Amy, Streets Ahead, that were the highways people. They all came together to put a street tree strategy for them. Sheffield also were successful in obtaining ETF funding from the Woodland Trust, which is great. This is a tree here planted by a child, funded by the Woodland Trust, which is great. And it's been good. I mean, just on the wider country and even probably beyond internationally, it's really helped the public understand that trees have value and they're worth keeping. There's less inquiries, and also it's useful for other councils to say, well, you know, and tree officers in other councils say, well, you don't want a Sheffield to happen when, you know, councils suggest perhaps they could take out some trees because they're too expensive. So, I mean, there have been silver lines, but it's been a very difficult time in Sheffield. And, you know, and it's still reeling from it now. So yeah, so it's just a little bit of a cautionary tale. And just to say, if ever you are going to hand over large proportions of your trees over to a contract, then it is worth having qualified and accountable arboriculturalists who has some say in what's happening. Because if that had happened, then if someone in charge had been a tree person, then it wouldn't have happened. They would have been able to see some of the problems with what was proposed all those years ago. So a cautionary tale. And I think Maggie's going to share she may have already done it. She's going to share the two woodland strategies and street tree strategies in the chat. So that's me. I'll pass back to Natalie.
Thank you, Catherine. And you mentioned Wrexham there. So we have got a video next from the Chief Executive of Wrexham. It's about 9 minutes long, so grab yourself a cup of coffee and listen in, and then we'll be back with Nerys afterwards. Thank you. We can't hear the video. Bear with us.
Borodar, good morning. Many thanks for the opportunity to enable me to speak at this Wales Biodiversity Partnership Conference, and specifically about our tree and woodland strategy in Wrexham. Wrexham Council developed and published our tree and woodland strategy in 2016 to cover a period to 2026. The ambition of which is that we have a sustainably managed and protected healthier and diverse tree population with sufficient canopy cover to benefit and meet the needs of all who live, work and visit Wrexham, with a specific objective of increasing urban canopy cover to 20% by 2026. The creation of this strategy was a clear demonstration of our commitment at that point, an ambition for Wrexham to become a greener place with more trees across the streets and public open spaces and well cared for public woodlands. And it was also about ensuring that we link that priority to other objectives such as health and well-being, public realm, economic regeneration, active travel and decarbonisation. As we all know, 10 years, possibly even 10 days, is a long time in public service and local government at the moment. So we felt it was really important to pause and take stock of this strategy and where we are. The additional impetus of the climate and ecological emergency that we all face, and many of us have declared local emergencies on, including our council in September 2019, has brought a renewed focus on how we use land in our ownership and how we can use our functions to influence other areas of land. It was great to work with the Woodland Trust, and we began our independent review with them on our strategy, and really critical the delivery of that strategy. As you can imagine, challenges we and you face include things like budget, recruitment, retention of skilled and experienced staff, public perception and understanding of the strategy, conflicting priorities and demands, and focus on other priorities, particularly over the last 2 years during COVID-19. Now, all of these ultimately impact on the time, priority, and commitment to deliver the objective that we set about increasing urban canopy cover. We've started to begin and are implementing a number of initiatives now that we're confident will go some way to addressing those challenges and the ones that we identified in the review of our strategy. For example, we recognise that the Tree and Woodland Strategy, whilst of great quality and calibre, is a lengthy document which may be for some people be inaccessible, and also which hasn't had the leadership level and seniority push through organisations, including our own and partners across the borough. So therefore we've strengthened and summarised our commitment to trees and woodland with the creation of a woodland pledge, and that's been signed by our executive board, increasing momentum with partners who are now also signing up to that woodland pledge. The pledge acts as a vital communication tool, both within different departments of our council and with our partners, and with the wider public of Wrexham, as it more clearly and succinctly articulates our commitment to trees, their innate value and their many benefits. And I'm not going to apologise for just reading out the pledge, because I think it brings it home in simplicity when we talk through that. Trees and woodlands are an essential element of the county borough's townscape and landscape, and are integral to the well-being, health and quality for all who live, work and visit Wrexham. Trees add considerable environmental, social and economic value to Wrexham County Borough. However, their future cannot be taken for granted. Climate change, pests and disease, development, modern agricultural practices and misplaced perceptions of risk are just some of the problems that threaten our trees. The aim of our Tree and Woodland Strategy is that we have a sustainably managed and protected, healthy and diverse tree population with sufficient canopy cover to benefit and meet the needs of all who live, work and visit the county borough. Wrexham Council has therefore developed the following statements that act as a pledge to increasing canopy cover and protecting existing woodland across the county borough. 1. We acknowledge the vital contribution that trees make to our response to the climate emergency. 2. We acknowledge and value the multiple social, environmental and economic benefits of trees and woodlands. 3. We're committed to the protection and conservation of trees and woodland. 4. We're committed to the creation of additional areas of woodland and planting of trees. 5. We view trees and woodlands as part of our critical infrastructure. 6. We'll plan for greener landscapes and communities. 7. We'll improve health and well-being through encouraging and enabling connections with nature and woodland. 8. We'll actively engage and involve local communities in the management, protection and enhancements of trees and woodlands. 9. We'll actively seek opportunities to work with various partners to maximise opportunities for the creation and protection of woodland across the county borough, such as the Wrexham Forest. And 10, we'll renew our commitment to ensuring that the aims and objectives of our Tree and Woodland Strategy can be met. For me, these pledges are around a leadership commitment that shows we've got a common and shared purpose and understanding to make a difference both in our organisations, with partners and personally. For example, myself, I have an oak tree in the garden. Those pledges, particularly the one about protecting and conserving trees and woodlands, mean something to me personally in how I think about the mature trees that I have a responsibility for. I also live in a village with landowners, with farmers, and that pledge makes me think as I pass those people on my daily walks with my dog and I see them undertaking their land management practices, it makes me stop and have a conversation, particularly if they're pulling down a tree or they're undertaking major conservation management in their area. In addition, we're working with a range of colleagues and partners through the Wrexham Forest Partnership, which is a collaboration of public, third and private sector organisations with a common goal to increase and protect trees and woodlands across the county borough. As referred to within our review, there's an undeniable challenge in capacity and resource to deliver on the aims of the strategy, with issues of recruitment, retention and budget impacting on the public sector and beyond. However, with the pooled knowledge, expertise and resources of the Wrexham Forest Partnership, we can ensure that we're working with a common goal and delivering on our shared ambition. Our review also highlights the significant success of our green infrastructure project, which worked in Kyer Park and Plasmatic. And while this was a success for a variety of reasons, the fact that it was grant funded and supported from a range of different funding sources, which acted as a catalyst to working in a different way with different partners. We're keen to build on this model and have been successful in a bid to the Woodlands Trust Emergency Tree Fund. Our Woodland Connections project, as a result, will work with communities and stakeholders across the county borough to improve existing woodland and enable communities to connect with their environment and build a lasting respect for trees and woodland in their local area. We're really excited for this project to commence and hope to engage with the public and private sector partners to identify areas of land or existing woodland which we can include in this work. I hope briefly that I've been able to share our organisational commitments, Wrexham's commitments, and with our partners, and my own personal commitment to this area of work. In a time of an emergency, or many emergencies, people often think it's a grand gesture that counts. It isn't. It's making a real and practical difference to increasing diversity. In our case, through increasing woodland cover. It's a time for leaders to act practically, create a common purpose, and lead by example to make a real difference. We all have this responsibility. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Bore da.
No, thank you. So that was Ian Bancroft, the CEO of Wrexham Council, and we will have Rachel on the panel later from the Department of the Environment to who's worked closely with Ian to answer any questions on the Wrexham experience. So that's two fantastic perspectives of local authority tree strategies, and Ian referred in the video to an independent review that's been taken out, because writing the strategy is one step, but obviously making sure it's implemented is another. So we have now Nerys, our next speaker, Nerys Jones, who was involved in the independent review, was commissioned to undertake that, and will be given a brief overview of the findings from that review and what next. Okay, thank you, Nerys.
Paul, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Bore da, pawb. Good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me while the screen unsharing is going on.
Yep, go ahead, Nerys.
Yep, fine. I'm Nerys Jones. I'm an independent green space consultant, and as Natalie just explained, Coed Woodland Trust asked me to review the Wrexham County Borough Council Tree and Woodland Strategy. This is not the first strategy that Wrexham has produced, and Catherine referred, I think, to an earlier strategy which the council has already undertook, which really looked just at their own trees. This is, I think, the third iteration of that strategy, and it's the first of its kind in Wales. As you heard in the video, the period that the strategy covers is 2016 to 2026, so we're roughly halfway through that period, so it seemed a good time to really look at how it was working out in practice, basically how effectively the implementation was. So I interviewed a number of the key players from the leader, deputy leader, senior management team, a number of officers who were working more at the sharp end of the coalface, as it were, who really understood the practical detail and the difficulties of undertaking things in practice, but also interviewed a number of the council's partner organisations, such as Natural Resources Wales and the North Wales Wildlife Trust. So, as you just heard, that's a great response there from Ian Bancroft, Wrexham's Chief Executive, to the review findings. And that's very pleasing to see. The analysis really of the work revealed many strengths and perhaps a number of weaknesses as well to Wrexham's approach. And I just briefly wanted to pick up some of the points this morning. So I don't have pictures to show you. I'm sorry about that. It's another talking head for a few minutes. But I'm just going to use 4 or 5 points that emerged from the analysis to show the complexity of these issues and to acknowledge really that this isn't easy for a local authority. So full marks to Wrexham really for getting to grips with something so complicated, and I hope you'll see that this is really quite nuanced. So the first point I wanted to pick up on, which is strength, is the holistic nature of the strategy. What I mean by that is that it covers the whole of Wrexham County Borough. I mentioned that one of their earlier strategies just looked at the council's own trees, but this strategy looks at all of the land in the borough. And this is great because there are a number of other important players here. If we were to just look at the council's own trees, we'd be looking probably at fewer than 25%, maybe even as low as 20% of the trees. So this is a very good approach, which many other authorities around the world have taken. But I suppose the counterpoint to that, which might be considered a weakness, is that the council doesn't have direct control over other landowners. So how are they going to achieve the goals that are in the strategy? Well, you've already heard part of the answer to that in Ian Bancroft's video. It is of course partnership working. So Wrexham already have a couple of examples of excellent projects, quite small scale, but excellent green infrastructure projects, which they're undertaking in partnership with the Wildlife Trust and local communities. And as was acknowledged in the video, I think we're going to see a lot more of that approach, really. It's a way of achieving a great deal more. And so through initiatives like the Wrexham Forest, which is just getting underway, I think they'll be really rolling out that approach. The second issue is a strength is that there are some clear targets in the strategy. As has already been mentioned, one of them is to increase canopy cover to 20%. But again, the counterpoint to that is how do they know that they've achieved that? And if you have a lack of monitoring, then it's really difficult to really see what progress there is, because whilst trees are being planted on the one hand, trees are being lost through maybe development processes or natural causes. So it's a dynamic picture. So numbers are going up, numbers are going down. How do you keep track of what the overall trend is? So there are different ways of doing this, of course, and you can do it in some detail, which takes time and costs money. But we're very fortunate in Wales in that there is a way of doing things rather more simply, and that is through an assessment of aerial photographic coverage. Natural Resources Wales has provided aerial photographs of the whole country, and this has been reflown at intervals of a few years, and this resource is available free to anyone to use. So this is a fantastic asset, and it's one way of keeping track fairly quickly, maybe in a rough and ready way, but give you a fairly good assessment of canopy cover. A third point I wanted to pick up on, which is a real strength in Wrexham's strategy, is that there is real high-level commitment to this work, as you just heard from Chief Executive, but also the leader, the deputy leader, the management team. But again, a sort of a subtle counterpoint to this is that there are, of course, conflicting departmental priorities, and I think this is inevitable in any large organisation. And I suppose a difficulty here is that it's not obvious to everybody that the strategy is relevant to them. And again, Ian mentioned that steps that they're going to take to address this issue. The fourth and final point I wanted to just pick up on is that the strategy is really very thorough indeed, and it's very well researched. So it's a really good, weighty piece of work. Again, the counterpoint to that is that, as acknowledged, this makes it a lengthy document, and this isn't very accessible to a lot of people. So people feel the weight of it and then think, that's too much information, maybe. So ideally, it needs a much simpler summary of the key points. And Wrexham has already addressed this really through their Tree and Woodland pledge. So that's great to see. It's just sort of summarises in 10 points why trees and woodlands matter to the borough. So I want to really finish by saying this really is all about communications, because for success, our local authority really does need buy-in, not just from the different levels within the authority, not just from councillors and elected members and officers, but from partner organisations, but also from businesses and down to individual residents. Everyone needs to understand the contribution that trees and woodlands can make to the well-being of the local population. And I think we're going to see that that's going to be the focus of Wrexham's efforts over the next 4 to 5 years. So we really wish them well with that. Diolch yn fawr, that's all I wanted to say for the moment. And back to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Nerys. Good summary there. Thank you. Could I ask the other panel participants to put their cameras on now? Hello, Rachel. We should have Catherine as well. Thank you. To the constituents of the conference, if you'd like to put any questions in the chat, that would be great. To we have about 10 minutes before the end of this session. But to sorry, Catherine, are you there?
I am there. Yeah. I don't know why it's not. I'm not appearing on the screen.
Okay. I wanted to start off with a question. Obviously, we have a wide range of benefits of trees that most people are aware of, you know, and how they fit into not just from a biodiversity point of view and a well-being and amenity point of view, but also their use in green infrastructure, decarbonisation plans and so on local authorities. So my question to open this was, do we feel that value across portfolios and across departments is really understood by senior leadership teams? Obviously Wrexham and Sheffield have shown some indication of that, but in terms of actually putting all of those different benefits into practice, is there more that we need to be doing to raise awareness of those benefits across portfolios? I'm going to start with you, Catherine, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think, you know, highlighting the importance of trees, you know, as part of vital infrastructure for cities and towns is really important. And I mean, people, you know, that work in other departments can often see trees as obstacles. You know, they're expensive, they cause risk. You know, they damage other infrastructure and things, and what's needed. I mean, almost, and then on the flip side, you know, kind of, I suppose the more members of the public that are really pro-tree can just think, well, trees should never be cut down and they should never have work on them. So getting that balance right is really important, and proper planning. I mean, like Nerys was saying about having, you know, the kind of knowing the resource and, you know, having that canopy cover assessment right down to the kind of really good urban design and integrating trees as, you know, as the first thing that they think about, rather than the last little bit at the end when they're, you know, how to pretty up the site a bit. That's what would be great to see. So something, I mean, it's something in the trust that I'll be working hard to try and promote.
Thank you. So Rachel, was it really difficult to get the senior leadership teams of Wrexham on board with this?
No, I don't think it's challenging to get people on board. I think especially with the creation of the pledge, I think it's a great opportunity for us where we've been able to highlight those multiple benefits, and obviously different benefits will appeal differently to different senior leaders, different elected members, different members of our staff teams, depending on what their priorities are. I think the challenge always comes in the practice, doesn't it? I think signing up to the pledge, it's quite difficult to disagree with when it's laid out like that. I think the challenge will always come in the practice, and it will always come when there is a conflicting priority. So as Catherine touched upon, you know, sometimes we see that trees are in the way, for want of a better word, of something else that people want to do. And I think it's all of our job to to highlight, I suppose, what the multiple benefits are, and also to ensure that we're around the table in those early discussions. So just as an example, we're talking more and more about trees with our city centre placemaking team, with our active travel and highways team, and identifying, you know, the benefits that trees can bring from an active travel perspective, for example, just in terms of creating that connected route that makes it easier for people to find their way, because we're creating a kind of a path, a corridor, using trees as part of that essential design and that infrastructure. So I think it's about getting the right people around the table, and as Catherine says, not being the afterthought in terms of, we've created this, now how will we make it look nice? So I know we'll plonk a couple of trees in, and that being there at the beginning as part of that fundamental thinking. I definitely think our declaration of a climate emergency has given us a new impetus and a new focus and a new sort of reason to reinvigorate our commitments if ever we needed one. And as senior leaders are considering their commitments to decarbonisation, trees can play a fundamental part in that. So that's something that has allowed us to be, from our department's perspective, to be around the table for a lot more of those conversations that maybe traditionally we wouldn't have been. So I think it's, the commitment is easy. I think it's always the practice that's difficult, but hopefully we're on that road of it becoming more integrated with our other priorities.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Now, is there anything you want to add?
Well, only to agree really that I think people don't fully understand the wide range of benefits of trees, but as Rachel has just mentioned, things like the climate emergency, I think, give an impetus really to looking at things in a slightly different way. So after the summer we've just had, I don't think people can really deny that shade is quite an important issue, even in North Wales. And you know, those kinds of benefits of trees maybe have been a little bit overlooked. It requires some quite sophisticated, targeted design actually to really get the most out of the shade benefits of trees. But traditionally, I think people have been concerned more about loss of light, but now maybe we'll be seeing that people want to see more shade. Similarly, increasing rainfall, more severe rainfall events mean that flood control is a pretty important issue, and the way in which we achieve more porous, more absorbent town centres is something that we're beginning to think about a lot more, and trees can really play their part in that more integrated way of looking at flood control. So I think we just need to be a bit more creative really about explaining the wide range of benefits.
Okay, we've started having some questions coming through, so I might not ask all the panel to answer this so we can get through them. But the first question is from Brian Palmer, who asks if there are any suggestions for supporting and increasing trees at village level, because obviously we've talked about cities, Sheffield, and now a city, Wrexham. So there's lots of small villages in Mid and North Wales rather than large towns. So this one's to you, Rachel. You know, did your plan include villages, and if so, you know, how did you go about it, or if not, you know, what needs to be considered?
Yes, definitely. And obviously people will be aware that until very recently we weren't a city. Now we are a city, but the city area covers our whole county borough, which includes lots of small outlying villages, some more rural than others. And our plan with the Emergency Tree Fund, for example, is to work with community groups in a range of those areas. So some kind of street trees in the city centre, but also looking at locations around the county borough, the city, which are more rural, more village in nature, and working with those communities. So we've got a number of areas where we know that previously, when, as Neris referred to, we measured canopy cover, there were villages that had lower canopy cover than others. So we'll start with targeting those and looking for opportunities there. We've already begun a sort of development of an inventory, if you like, of pieces of land that are available to us, starting with land in our ownership, but we're going to widen that out through the Wrexham Forest Partnership, and what they may be suitable for. So I've seen something in the chat about other kind of enhancements and wildflower meadows, etc. So what we're doing is an inventory of various pieces of land that we could use and assessing what they could be used for, which could be tree planting, could be wildflower meadows, could be peat bog restoration. And so we're trying to look at those, and they will be across the county borough. So they won't specifically be in the city centre, won't specifically be urban, but will be across the piece. And that's how we're looking at it, really. So yes, we'll definitely be working with, you know, community councils in outlying villages and any groups that want to work with us, really.
Great, Rachel. You've answered 2 questions in one go, which is brilliant. Thank you. Nerys, can I ask you about the question from Jerry about how useful do you think the concept of tree equity is? It's a new model that's come out, hasn't it? And is trying to focus down on areas of need from a social economic point of view. Any views on that?
Well, I can't say I'm very well across all of this, but and I see that Catherine maybe would prefer to answer that. So rather than me give you a kind of half-baked answer, why don't we let Catherine...
Refer to Catherine. Catherine, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, because this is one of our leadership projects, well, our key projects that we're just starting at the Woodland Trust. So tree equity, basically, it's the idea that everybody has access to the benefits of trees and woodlands. And American Forests have done, you can go and have a look online. They've done these amazing maps for every city in the US, where they've given a tree equity score for neighborhoods. And I think it's an interesting one, because for the American Forest one, they actually give the numbers of trees that each neighborhood might have, you know, might want to get a higher tree equity score. In reality, you know, when I used to be a tree officer, I used to work in less affluent areas, and I think that's where the good design getting in, because trees tend to cause more problems for areas of higher density. You know, people don't have the money to cut back to the boundary and things like that. So getting the design right, when we're putting more trees into these areas, we need to think about the benefits of those trees and what they're giving. Not just that they have more trees, but those trees are really enhancing those areas and giving, you know, giving that shade and that beauty, and, you know, making places much nicer places to be, rather than just a kind of tick box exercise of how we get there. So I mean, I definitely think you tend to find in a lot of areas there are fewer trees because there's less places to plant in higher density, less affluent areas. How we get there or not is going to be my job at the trust for the, you know, for the next few years. So but it's something that I think is really important. I'm really glad that it's starting to come up, and you know, and be seen that trees should benefit everybody.
Okay, that leads me on nicely, Catherine, if I might stay with you to the next question, which was about the ethos of right tree in the right place, and how difficult it might be in getting agreement on what to plant where. And she's thinking here particularly in terms of small areas rather than big projects. Have you had any project experience and can give some insights into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one, because what I'd always say is get someone on the ground to go and have a look at the area. You know, I mean, that's where that resource is needed for staff to go and have a look at places. I mean, kind of overall of an urban forest, the key is diversity. So you know, we've seen how hot it can get. You know, you're in non-natural environments. You need trees that are going to be able to survive there for the next 50 years. So it might be that non-natives are used sometimes. But I mean, for example, you know, if you've got, say, an area of high-rise flats or something, you know, getting the community involved, something like community orchards and things like that, where the people that live in those areas are going to love those trees. That is what those trees are for. You've got to have buy-in with local communities. And I mean, having a good arboriculturalist and TDAG, if you look at the TDAG database, they will often tell you the right tree to plant if you've looked at the soil and you've looked at the conditions and all that kind of thing. But you know, trees don't always read what they're meant to do. No. Sometimes just local knowledge is quite useful as well, and looking what around and what's doing well is useful. So ground truthing, work with the community, you know, have a look at TDAG, have some knowledge about it, and that's there's no kind of, you know, instruction booklet, I think, that you can just read and say, oh yes, we'll have that tree. You've got to do a range of things.
Okay, thank you. We've got 1 more minute, so I'm going to ask you all to answer this in one very quick, one short sentence. How do you resource the ongoing maintenance of newly planted trees? Nerys, have you got a 1 sentence answer to that?
Yeah, design for low maintenance, I think, is the answer to that. There are different ways of doing things, but keep the commitment low by having good design.
Okay, thank you. Rachel?
Hard one to answer. That's a major question and hard one to answer in one sentence. But I think for me, some of it is around using the resource that we have differently. So as we reduce things like our grass cutting to be more biodiverse, how do we utilise the resource that we have there by delivering more arboricultural training to our streets scene staff, etc. So it's about shifting things around and doing it differently, but it's always a challenge.
Perfect, thanks. Catherine, did you have anything new to add? One sentence?
I'd just say give the policy makers the knowledge that trees need looking after. They're not just for Christmas, they need to be properly resourced.
That's a lovely note to finish on. Thank you very much. Thank you all of you, Rachel, Neris and Catherine, and Ian virtually on the video. It's been great having you all talk about your experiences on tree strategies in urban areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to be moving on to our next session now of this morning, our final session around the theme of human needs are met. And this one's about wildfire, good and bad fire. As per the last two sessions, you could put questions into the meeting chat area and there will be moderators in the background looking at that. And details of our speaker for this session will be on the website. And we're recording this session. If this is the first session you've been into, there are going to be pre-recorded sessions that you can look at afterwards if you need to. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our speaker for this session, Becky Davis for Natural Resources Wales. Hello, Becky.
Hi.
And Becky's going to be talking about what's a growing challenge as our climate becomes drier and hotter, and we get extremes, for example, of wind and so on. I mean, at the Woodland Trust, we know that we monitor weekly alert systems around fires and issues that our site managers need to be aware of. And increasingly, I'm hearing our estate team talk about fire breaks in wood design. There's more communications and responses to fires from the community in our woods. So this is a real issue and it's with us now. So I'm delighted that Becky Davis is here for a senior officer in the NRW planning team to talk us through an RDP funded project called Healthy Hillsides at how you can decrease and manage wildfire risk at a landscape scale. So over to you, Becky, and I'll look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks very much, Natalie. And that's really good to hear that, you know, wildfire is being considered in how you sort of manage the woodlands and do your management. So that's really good to hear. I'm just going to share my screen. So bear with me 1 second. So hopefully everybody can see that clearly. So yes, as Natalie said, my name is Becky Davis and I work in Natural Resources Wales. I'm a senior officer in the South Central Wales, which is Cardiff, Vale, South Central sort of Wales valleys. And I program manage this piece of work called Healthy Hillsides. My background is in biodiversity, environmental management, but sort of I've also been working on the South Central Wales area statement and very sort of involved in that sort of integrating of environmental and wider benefits of management. So I have many hats, but this is one of the ones that I really enjoy working on. And I work really closely with a really much wider project team. So a lot of them are on the call at the moment, and they will be certainly helping to answer questions and looking into the discussion later on. But this was very much I do thank them all because this is a joint effort in putting this together. So I'm going to be talking to you about wildfire, the work of the Healthy Hillsides Wildfire Project. So it's about good fire and bad fire. So we're going to talk through the impacts of bad fire, the wildfire impacts, but also good fire, where fire can be used and is being used as a management solution and in tactical firefighting. There you go. So yes, I'm going to really sort of focus in on the context of biodiversity, ecological resilience, as I am talking to a conservation community. So this project is funded through Welsh Government and the Rural Development Fund, and it is there to look at wildfire and demonstrate the variety of different ways to tackle the challenge. There are many elements of this project, and I'm only going to briefly touch on some of them, but and sort of really try and sort of do this from a biodiversity perspective. But fundamentally, this project is about an interaction between people and the environment, how we're working together and understanding our different perspectives, that this can really help us achieve our individual, community, organisational and strategic goals. We do have a common purpose in this. But I want this to be really a discussion. This is a workshop sort of form, and we want these discussions to inform our wider work, what we're doing with a variety of different partners, stakeholders, as one of our key end products is a toolkit, which is there to be used across Wales, across the UK, to sort of very practically and pragmatically deal with the varying aspects of wildfire. So I really do implore you all to sort of contribute to this conversation. So keeping in the theme of this session, it is about engagement and how, the human needs are being met. And so I want this work to support the needs of the conservation community in the different ways in which wildfire may come into your sphere of influence. So I thank you for coming along today, choosing this presentation, and I really encourage you to contribute to the discussion. Please feel free to make comments, post questions in the chat function, but also there will be a number of polls throughout the session, which will magically appear when I sort of prompt somebody in the background, and there will be an opportunity for open discussions as well. So I really do, please do pipe up. To manage this discussion, if you raise your hand on the Teams function, somebody behind the scenes will unmute you and you can ask your question verbally. But if you don't feel you want to do that, please do put questions in the side. Forewarn you, puns within wildfire really flow way too easily. So yeah, they will pop up. This is unintentional and intentional. So yeah, thank you. So I'm going to start with a couple of polls. So if somebody in the background could pop those up. This is just very much to start the conversation and to gather a bit of understanding of who we're talking to. So yeah, so who are you? Who are we talking to here? So if you could, there's multiple choice there. So if you could say who you are. The other poll then is about how great is the threat of wildfire in Wales. So before I tell you how bad or how low the risk is, please can you sort of put your perspective in. There's no right or wrong answer. It's really, really important that we gauge where people would think, and it is, it genuinely be used in our work. Also, who is the responsibility for wildfire? Again, there's no right or wrong answer, and this is something that we ask across the different partners all the time. So who do you think is responsible for wildfire? And then the last question is, do you consider wildfire as part of conservation management? Again, no right or wrong answer, and it will vary depending on the type of habitats that you work on, the type of sort of biodiversity, species or habitats you work on, or whereabouts in the country you are. Some places have a far greater wildfire risk than others. I can't see the screen properly, so I hope they have come up and everyone's clicking away. Thank you.
Becky, just to confirm, I'm just going through them one by one, so we're up to whose responsibility is wildfire.
Awesome, thank you very much. You can keep clicking on those whilst I flick over to the next slide. So looking at wildfire in the context of our two big emergencies, climate change and nature emergency. So the most common and frequent impacts of climate change are flooding, sea defences, drought. The wildfire issues are sort of seen in the context of Australia or Canada or California, Greece, Portugal. And I do not take away the fact that the impacts and the sort of cover of the fires in places like this are massive and on a very huge scale. But it is about it. that is how it's seen and it's perceived, that this is a problem in places like Australia. Until this year, until this year, where wildfire in the UK has, become far more visible. We've all I'm sure we all sort of saw on the news. We experienced record high temperatures this year, around 37.1 degrees in Flintshire. So, that's hot. I can say it felt a lot hotter for me. I was in the Royal Welsh Show in a tent, and it felt very, very hot. So it then hit the headlines that, there was fire of significance, massive significant fires in Britain. So I can't lie, it was genuinely quite helpful because, as I say, we were launching Wildfire in Wales discussions in the Royal Welsh Show. So it was kind of really helpful, and it did provoke conversation at the Royal Welsh, but also across our social media platforms as well. So it was shocking, it is shocking, but this is very much a warning of the future. So there are a great network of wildfire experts across the world, and I'm really proud that the South Wales Fire and Rescue Service and the other fire services across the UK are part of that network. But it's really stark warning that the wildfire experts across the world have warned the UK and much of Northern Europe that we in Greece, in Portugal, in Australia, were experiencing fires like you are seeing now 20 years ago. Now we are experiencing super fires. So please heed and act now, and you have time to adapt, which is a really, really stark warning. So under climate change predictions, wildfire, amongst other environmental hazards, are set to get more prevalent, and they will become more significant in a direct and indirect impacts on our landscape. We are already seeing the trend in the UK and in other Northern European countries where wildfire is increasing and is set to increase under prediction scenarios. So one of the sort of ways in which this is sort of highlighted is through UK climate risk assessments. So it is set to, that is very clear in that UK risk assessment that wildfire is set to increase. Yet despite this, in considering the data in Wales, the Wales climate plan, which is called Climate Conscious Wales, does not mention wildfire once. Yet our respective climate plans in England, Northern Ireland and Scotland discuss wildfire significantly as a major climate change challenge, and very clearly says we need to act now. So there are many sort of varied knock-on impacts from wildfire as well. One of the significant impacts highlighted in the UK climate risk assessment, which gave a Welsh summary, are that landslips following wildfire will be a key problem. For very obvious reasons. Landslips, particularly, I work in the South Wales valleys, is a particularly cultural and emotive problem. So, we need to understand these sort of challenges. We need to understand the evidence gaps around sort of those links with landslips as well. So, we need to integrate that thinking and work collaboratively to understand that challenge. So this is a very real, safety, cultural and environmental concern, particularly in the South Wales valleys, but across Wales. So that risk, set to increase with wildfires, with climate change, but then exacerbated by, other issues like high rainfall events and extreme conditions to really exacerbate those problems. So this is another poll, so if somebody could pop that one up. So it's just a question really, and again, it'll probably be reflected in where and how you work. So which habitats do you feel, in your experience or your perceptions, are the greatest risk from wildfire? So there's a couple of options there. So if you could sort of click, I think you can click multiple options. That'd be really useful. And then also, what do you feel are the key impacts on wildfire? As sort of mentioned there are those knock-on effects. So where do you think wildfire is actually, having those knock-on impacts? If you could just click on those while I stop talking about other things. So going on to the nature emergency, our other massive challenge. So this is another underlying theme which is really increased by the impact and effects on wildfire. It is shared because of the increase in wildfire and the increased loss of biodiversity and the ecological resilience that, and their ecological resilience to withstand impacts like and pressures like for wildfire. One of the issues of loss of biodiversity is the lack of appropriate management, loss of traditional management such as low intensity grazing, loss of natural processes, and the actions of large herbivores in the landscape, the draining, degrading of bogs, draining of wetlands, agricultural intensification. They've all changed the landscape, impacting biodiversity and the ability to be resilient. Another way to look at this is that we have altered the balance of fuels in the landscape. Actions have favoured monocultures. They've purposely, either purposely grown for crops as part of our agricultural management, or just through lack of management and loss of natural processes, in the case of bracken or Molinia dominance in the landscape. Some of these habitats are at most pressure, and they are really important for specialist species and those sort of mosaic habitats which are under greatest pressure from wildfire. So in the South Central Wales valleys, we've undertaken an ecological resilience assessment as part of the South Central Area Statement, which is there to restore, support nature and ensure that nature is at the heart of decision making. So in these assessments, the impact of wildfire has actually been highlighted in several key ecosystems as a key pressure. In particular, we have identified a valleys ecosystem. So whilst that's not, so your classic sort of ONS habitat, but this is, very characteristic of place. So this includes frieze, coed or upland mosaic, and that post-industrial landscape coal spoil. It is mentioned also in our peatlands ecosystem assessment, our woodlands, our freshwater ecosystem assessments. So all have seen that there are knock-on effects there impacting those ecosystems' ability to be resilient, and whether these fires are small as part of sort of local marginal sites or as part of big impacts on SACs as well. Fires happen most commonly in the spring when the fuel load can be at its highest and there's generally no green vegetation. This, for obvious reasons, is probably puts the greatest pressure on our breeding birds, but also reptiles. We are starting to see more and more summer fires, and where conditions like this summer will sort of go on, we will definitely see more summer fires. This is particularly bad because it means the temperatures and conditions are so hot that even green vegetation will burn easily. This can have a much longer lasting impact because our hillsides won't be greening back up and they will be causing erosion and loss of soils. So these fires they may impact small but vitally important corridors and connecting habitats, but these these are often really close to communities, and these are maybe the places where people experience nature, rather than going up into the large sort of sites which were also impacted. These ones are often designated. They may be sort of peatland. They may be the watersheds of catchments. In addition to those loss of individual species and those direct impacts on habitats, we're also seeing those knock-on impacts to the other ecosystems, such as freshwater pathways. But also, when we look at our intentions and our sort of actions on climate change mitigation, like tree planting, the new or newly sort of naturally regenerating sort of woodlands, these are often being lost to wildfire, and then puts us further back in our climate change actions. There are also impacts to water and to air quality. This isn't just a health risk to communities, though it is a significant one, particularly in areas of poor air quality. But this is also leading to additional deposition onto plants, onto habitats, which are already impacted by acid and nitrogen deposition. So, this list can be pretty exhaustive, to be honest with you. It just goes on and on and on. So notwithstanding these issues that we've talked about, you know, there are a number of lessons being learned, which, you know, as I've been working on this project, you know, I've been able to sort of learn more and more about the problem of wildfire, and you know, it's very clear to me that wildfire is a conservation problem. It is a problem for us working in conservation. To be honest with you, when I first started on this work, linking it to wildfire was probably a means to an end. I was exploring ways to re-establish sustainable and necessary land management for improved ecological resilience and biodiversity benefit. I saw it as a management tool to restore those open habitats of roast pasture or freeze, but you know, that was my sort of primary interest. And that was the interest and the goal of my organisation as well. But, you know, very quickly, I sort of, you know, in talking to others, the Fire and Rescue Service, as an example, want to reduce wildfire for protection of communities and fire officers tackling the blaze. So it's, you know, it's not as dangerous. And then when we sort of started talking and coming together on this, we realised that we could really achieve our goals by working together, because we definitely had a common purpose to this. So ultimately, the actions, you know, need both our goals to be similar. You know, ultimately the actions need for our goals to be similar, but you know, we have different ways of doing it, and we just need to work together and ensure that the actions that we are undertaking on the ground work towards our respective goals. Yeah, I forgot to flick that slide. So, but this does show, you know, very clearly that there, you know, those links with grazing as a key sort of management control of our landscape really will have benefits to reducing fire frequency and intensity. So a little bit of sort of right way back to the beginning of healthy hillsides. So you know, where it came from, the embers of the fire. Of the issue of the project, we had seemingly very different concerns, you know, and the conversation really very much started on the introduction of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act and the Environment Wales Act, you know, and standing basically on a hillside, you know, and looking at a burnt hillside where we were just about to spend £40,000 on fencing it off, because, you know, we can graze this, we can reduce the habitat and increase the sort of mosaic, the diversity of that habitat, when two fire officers pulled up and to scratch their heads about, you know, how do we tackle this problem? Or what we've been doing, you know, putting our primary sort of energy in is education, but talking about our common problem from very different perspectives, it became the beginning of a really, you know, interesting and dynamic partnership working. So the Healthy Hillsides project, you know, sort of came together on the exchange of that information and that sort of driver from the Environment Wales Act and the Future Generations Act, to sort of look at how we can do things differently, how can we benefit the environment and communities at the same time. It was needed to be done. I think, you know, it started in South Wales valleys because this is the epicenter of wildfire in Wales. Over the past 20 years, we've had 75,000 wildfires just in that area. You know, it is a massive, massive problem, and it comes from that sort of close human community interface with you know, a pretty wild environment, which is to the largest extent not managed. So that's why, you know, it was key that we sort of started there. The Healthy Hillsides project, as I say, is a funded project through Welsh Government's Rural Development Plan. We have a grant award, so the project is due to end in June 23, even though we are trying to get a small extension. But it is very much there to look at, you know, how can we work collaboratively? How do we work with partners, with demonstrating the sort of variety of different solutions that we can deliver on the ground, and strategically as well, and influence others to make these to put all this together. This sort of gives a bit of an idea of the full range of the different things that we are looking at. As I said, I am concentrating more on the conservation impacts here, but you know, there are a lot of different themes and things coming out of this work. So, you know, but at the core, you know, is prevention, education and responding. So, you know, it's acknowledging that, you know, we need to prevent. This can't be done alone. It is a team effort, and there are actions for everyone, whether that be homeowners, communities, landowners, organisations, emergency services, national and local government. Education, yes, in schools, that is very important, but the evidence shows that it isn't just children setting fires, it is adults, you know, doing it as well. You know, it is often from arson of people who should know better. But it's also, you know, around land management that genuinely and unfortunately gets out of control. So training is really key, and raising awareness of the challenges are really, really key. And this is for the fire services, for ecologists, for communities, for decision makers. We need to train and understand the issues better. And then responding, you know, how do we manage wildfire, building this into strategy? How do, you know, the fire services tackle fire? How can they change that? But also, you know, in all our differing roles, how we support incidents as a landowner, as a regulator, whichever way it is, you know, we have a role to play here. So, you know, wildfire, how do we consider wildfire in our own responses to the nature and climate emergencies? So, as I say, there's loads of information there, you know, and lots I have not gone into on the specifics of the project, but there are, we have got lots of information, videos on our YouTube channel, and we have social media with links there as well. So if you search at Hillsides_Wales on social media, you'll be able to find us. As I say, searching, you know, Healthy Hillsides Wales, and maybe somebody's going to pop those into the chat box as well. So I wanted to really sort of open up a bit of a discussion here. So, you know, we have got the biggest challenges and the concerns about managing wildfire. You know, is this your problem as land managers or conservationists? That's what we need to sort of start that and open that conversation here, and how we, as part of this project, can sort of start to link that information in. As an example, you know, the fire and rescue services, you know, have been doing this. We've done it together, and we've been working very, very closely with them. They have obviously very tactical elements of this and how they manage fire. And it's really, really fantastically refreshing to see that, you know, I can talk to the fire service, and I've learned so much from them. And equally, I think, you know, I'm going to say that they feel the same way about us as well. Yes, the fire service are very reactive and dynamic, and have, certainly to my experience, acted very, very quickly and have made large changes. This has been done working closely with us on the project, but also building close relationships with the global wildfire community. This has led to the South Wales Fire and Rescue Service leading and in the most in being proactive and tactical wildfire across the UK. They are literally being flown in to support fire services across the UK and in Europe. The fire and rescue services have adapted to how they fight fires, so building a toolbox of tricks really to fight these fires, which have led to massive efficiencies. And so instead of having 2, 3, 4, even 5 fire engines, all with pumps on and manned to a wildfire event, sometimes now they can send individual, well, you know, 1 or 2 firefighters with you know, a drip torch to sort of fight fire with fire. So this is about back burning, sort of to put out the wildfire. It is amazing to see how such a small tactically, strategically set fire can extinguish you know, a really sort of deep burning, intense fire. This is a real game changer, and has been really, really effective. So they strategically burn lines out as well, sort of to create additional fire breaks. They did this, if you remember the big fires on Winter Hill in Manchester, the South Wales Fire Rescue Service went out and burnt tactical lines in order to extinguish significant portions of that fire. So their use of good fire techniques has brought fire officers from all over Europe to train, and this is, how they've been building that really fantastic network across the whole of Europe and further afield. So, I think this just touches on the very, there are many different reactive and preventative interventions that have been developed as part of a technical group, but also, the need to sort of make sure that we are being collaborative and sharing and listening in development of these interventions. So this is where I would like, and I invite you to just ask some general questions, make some general statements here. We've got a bit more to talk about, but I've been talking a long time already. So yes, if anyone has any questions or want to raise their hands, and somebody in the background will unmute you if you've got any questions or comments or statements that you want to make at this point. So I'm just looking at some of the chats as well. So one of the questions Matt Brown sort of mentions there. So do you have data on wildfires and how they started to help target the biggest threats? The answer is yes and no, as with everything with these sort of things. Yes, we do have some data, certainly from South Wales area. And as mentioned earlier on, the data does show that, there isn't just children setting these fires, which is kind of the blame often. It is adults as well, and we have had arrests in that vein as well. And so we work very closely with the police service as well to sort of make sure that we are considering that. But the reality is we see clusters of fires in things like roads, drop-off points, and they're often associated with fly tipping and other antisocial behaviours as well. So there are lots of connections around that as well. There are also accidental fires, which come from just other antisocial behaviours like fly tipping, and fly tipping in the vein of throwing their people's sort of vegetation like grass clippings, things like that, over the back fence. That doesn't help. Then when you've got a fire, that can really sort of exacerbate and put your own property at risk. So we've seen trends like that as well. So that is one sort of part of the work that we're doing is trying to sort of improve the way that we are collecting data on wildfires, and then so it can be used tactically by the fire service, but then also how, when we are considering management of sites, how we sort of bring that information in as well.
I think we had another comment as well, Becky, just from Jerry around the profile of wildfires as it currently stands in Wales. As generally, we tend to have that fire coming off heathlands and grasslands into woodlands or and burning the understories or young forests. So, as obviously with climate change, you want to just sort of describe how that could be adapted and in how that could change the profile of climate change moving forward. Is there anything that you think that might change the profile of it, or are we looking at more extreme wildfires because of the higher fuel loading that could be having under very dry condition woodlands and that type of thing?
Thanks, Harv. So yes, we are looking at that, and the predictions do show things like those warmer, wetter summers will proliferate certain growths of things like bracken, which are a major fuel load problem. So there are issues like that where where we do have management of things like woodlands. We should be, as Natalie mentioned at the beginning, needing to build that sort of into our management plans of sites. So where we're putting in plantations, we need to better consider that, because they will certainly be at significant risk for the first 8 years until they get past a growth sort of height. So that is a really key sort of thing that we need to consider. And these are all set in line, whether it's proactive mitigation measures that we're putting in because of climate change, or because of the sort of actions of growth on vegetation like bracken. We need to sort of consider that. But yes, drought periods, sort of warmer sort of periods, climate change says that we will have extreme events. So those extreme events could happen at any sort of point where we have torrential rain within summer, and then or significant heat episodes like we had this year, and if there are impacts that have happened, like I mentioned earlier on, if we have wildfires in the summer and then we have subsequent high rainfall events, that can really exacerbate sort of a lot of soil and loss of soil into the rivers and things like that. Just this one last question, and then I'll go on to the next stage. So what is the thinking by your NRW colleagues involved in the forestation scheme approval about designing for fire resistance? So something we have been scratching our heads around, and on the operational elements of the forestry Welsh Government estate, but also how do we design woodlands in the future. We have a sort of demonstration site that we've been looking at different ways of working to put in forest sort of big fire breaks within our forestry, but we're also incorporating that into our forest resource plans. So, sort of highlighting for key areas, as I say, particularly in the South Wales valleys, we're making sure there's a high level objective within the forest resource plans that wildfire is a challenge here, and therefore the sort of designing of woodlands and in clearing the woodlands and how we manage our woodlands, we're needing to make sure that we are considering wildfire as a key issue. And as I said, it's one of those things which, where you have that sort of growth period at the first few years, that's when they're at highest risk. So that's when we're going to need to put more effort into managing those. I see there's a hand up. Is that Deborah?
Yeah, thanks. Just a question, really. I don't know how practical it is, but just thinking, we've got excess flooding at certain times of the year, too much water, and then we get the droughts which cause the fires. Has anyone looked into integrating the management of water, the conservation of water, as part of the whole strategy for creating fire breaks, so that you kind of, I know it's not straightforward, but you're capturing water when we've got it into small, maybe almost like fire break shaped ponds or canals or whatever. That I don't know, just a thought. And then you've also got that water on site, which might help to slow things down. I just wondered if anything has been looked at around that.
Yes, so in the management of the Welsh Government Woodland Estate, we have discussed about sort of strategic ponds and things like that. As with everything, there are conflicts. As you know, if you dig a pond, guaranteed you'll have great crested newts in it before you know it. Can't find them anywhere, then they'll be in there. So there are challenges like that, and how we manage those sort of things. But we have certainly been thinking about it because of the need to sort of consider the integration of all our challenges, so drought protection, things like that. We've also looked at a number of key sort of strategic sites where we've said, the fire service has said to us, this is a massive problem area for us. It happens to be degraded with peat bog. So, we have I've been working with the Lost Peatlands project in the South Wales valleys, where we're sort of going, right, okay, this is a high risk fire area. We need to make sure that this has been put into a restoration program for peatland, wetting it up, encouraging that growth of wetland species, wet sort of mosses, rather than the predominant sort of millennia dry sort of habitats. It takes time, so we have to sort of have that those interventions in addition to, but eventually, if peatland restoration goes well, we do increase the sphagnum bosses rather than the sort of dominance of millennia. So that would sort of take it would reduce the risks because we're reducing the fuel load as well. With my other hat on, I do a lot of work on river restoration, and one of the things that I'm looking at is catchment responses. Again, linking in that peatland restoration, but having, traditionally flood risk management has sort of pushed water off out of the catchment as quick as possible. That's how we've dealt with flood. When we have to consider drought, we have to consider, preserving the ecological resilience of our freshwater flows. We need to sort of think about storing water. So small scale interventions to readdress the imbalance that we have in natural processes is something which I am trying to link across the different work streams that we're having. But it's important to sort of go, actually, what we need to do is rebalance natural processes, because that will have a benefit on wildfire, it'll have a benefit on drought protection, it'll have a benefit on river restoration or, flood mitigation as well.
No, thanks very much. Yeah, great.
Thanks. Right, okay, I'm going to sort of carry on with the presentation now. So I'm going to see everybody again. So there we go. So some of the things that we, sort of the key things that we've been doing in order to look at these problems is, first of all, know your site. I already touched on this a little bit, but, it is about going, what are the sort of, biodiversity, the ecology of the site? What is important here? Where do we have sort of key parts of our habitat here, which, are important for, specific species? Where do we have those veteran trees in this area? Where do we have invasive species? We want to really, really understand the site from an ecological perspective, so that any management interventions are not going to impact that biodiversity further because it's already under pressure, but also we can sort of enhance it as well. It's about knowing, and that was one of the questions earlier on, about knowing, how likely fires are to happen there and why. Are these sites of antisocial behaviour? Are they sort of, are they on a sort of a road that goes through where, naughty things happen, and people are doing things deliberately or unintentionally, but it comes from a bad place. Are these areas well used by the community in a positive light? How can we enhance that and incorporate that into the system? But then also, what is really key, and we have sort of experienced this, is what do the fire service sort of say here? We are looking at, is this site a genuine risk? Yes, it is, but we don't have many calls there because, for whatever reasons, there's low antisocial behaviours here. Or yes, this keeps me up at night, and we are genuinely worried because that house sort of backs onto that, and all those sort of things. So it's understanding that. Now, I mentioned earlier on a project example, Llanwynner, where we're working on the forest estate to sort of put fire breaks in. This is an area which gets put set on fire very, very frequently. So the officer put in fire breaks. The fire officer came in and went, "Oh, no, you don't want to put it that way. You need to put it this way." So it's talking to fire officers to sort of, they understand how fire works, which way it's going to move. So that is really, really key, that you build those relationships with fire officers because they understand how fire works. Our second sort of stage is then sort of the short-term management interventions. So we're using that evidence and the expertise around us. We know what the sites there. We know where the marsh fertilaries are. We know where the inns are. We want to sort of make sure that whatever happens, either proactively and preventatively, we are protecting these. But importantly, if there is a fire in this place, the fire service know you can strategically sort of go to this point here. We don't want it to get to this point. So it's about sort of understanding that, and we can put in fire breaks. We can sort of utilize footpaths, things like that, to sort of create fire breaks, or where fire officers can tactically work from. It's about understanding, where you want to go as well. So, there are short-term interventions which we might want to get to, so that we can make it more open for grazing, or understanding what are those long-term things that can be done. So understanding that long-term vision. So we have a number of sites where we really want to get grazing on there, but what type of grazing? We've had many sites which, fences would be very unsustainable, but the development of technologies has really been allow us to really explore different things. This is a real potential game changer in areas, particularly where we've been working with a lot of antisocial behaviours, where if we put fences in, they're going to get burnt or they're going to get stolen. We've had parts of fences stolen. I don't know what for, but a bit of 2x4 where they've been vandalised because of off-roading, and the list goes on and on and on. But things like geofencing really does offer an alternative. But saying that, it's still not always, grazing isn't always going to be the solution. So working with people like the Ramblers and community groups to promote this huge area of access that we do have, and the potential on our hillsides, people walking and getting out and about, and has benefits for them, on multiple levels. But I can really maintain fire breaks, but it also, it gives ownership of the hillsides, and their eyes and ears, that they can report, things that might not be right, or reporting fires and things like that. But even then, not all sites will be able to, have the grazing or the sort of really positive use on them, and for whatever reason, access may not be great, and physical fire breaks need to be cut based upon the risk of those sites. So that is something which as landowners, as land managers, need to sort of consider in the management of their sites to reduce their own risk and liabilities, or sort of advocating for trialing different ways of working. So we really hope in our toolkit that we'll be able to detail and provide case studies of the different ways of managing these interventions. Prescribed burning. This is often the most controversial of sort of discussions, really, and it's not always. I will really I want to get this very clear. It's not always the most appropriate or right tool for the job. The fire service, who are obviously very highly trained and experienced, and acknowledge that this is not always the right tool, and they have sites where they go no, and take it from me, the fire service, they put out fires, they like to start fires as well. They really promote the use of it when you know what you're doing. But sometimes, we have to acknowledge that it is the best tool for the job. So in discussions with forums, people get very passionate on opposing ends of the argument in favor of this, as a traditional management perspective, passing down that management skill through generations. This is culturally important in some places. But then on the opposite end of the scale, the concerns about the safety, about additional carbon release, about the impacts to biodiversity. So this is where I want to start, open up a conversation here about, where, what are your feelings about it, really? Is this a tool that, will, is this a tool that you would want to see? Do you have concerns? How can we, explore this and take this, I want to take the information you've got here, or your thoughts, so we can build it into, into our toolkit. So, we do strongly advocate that we, you must know your site, you must work with the fire service. But what are the additional barriers to prescribed burning in your thoughts, really? When would it be right, or should it never be used? Is there anything, is there such a thing as good fire, or is it all bad? Oh, sorry, pressed the wrong button there. So yeah, if anyone's got any questions, you can raise your hand, or pop it in the side. I will attempt to share my screen again. Right, I'm back. So a question. So I'm going to read out some questions then. So a question regarding urban situations. I have concerns about how the positive progress on changing management and maintenance practices for amenity grassland areas and reduced mowing in private gardens could be threatened after the urban fires last summer. Should best practice guidelines for urban areas be produced to prevent about turn? Yes. So one of the sort of work streams within this is around Firewise. So it is the idea that, you know, as homeowners, as, you know, local authorities, as any sort of land managers in whatever capacity, we should be wise to these concerns about managing your waste and all that sort of thing. So that will be a really clear sort of demonstration within that toolkit to sort of, you know, make sure that those urban areas are considered, you know, sort of how you manage compost to, you know, the antisocial element of like fly tipping as well. I see there's a hand up. If anyone hasn't, you can unmute yourself. The legacy hand? No, Graham, you have a question. I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
Sorry, yep.
Okay. Hiya, hello,
Becky,
Graham.
how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
It's thanks for your presentation, really interesting as ever. I'm the moorland officer working within Clwyd Range and Dee Valley AONB. I'm working on a particular project about wildfire risk reduction within that area, several thousand hectares of upland moorland, and sort of wildfire prevention and management planning. So yeah, this is right up our street, what we're working in North Wales. The question I have really, I suppose, about prescribed burning as a management tool. I think my biggest concern with the project we're doing here is lack of management and abandonment on upland moorland and grazing. So the fuel load is immense across the area. And I know we're going to attend, there's a webinar later on this afternoon about sustainable farming scheme and how one of the public goods could be reduction of wildfire risk by managing fuel load on these sort of habitats, particularly upland moorland and freeth. I suppose my question is how do we manage upland moorland whilst we're in a climate emergency on pretty inaccessible places without using prescribed and carefully controlled fire as a management tool? And I think it's a debate that needs to happen at a Wales level, really, and us to have a position on this and some scientific background as well. So we know that, you know, in terms of carbon emissions, you know, and regeneration of habitat and biodiversity, what is the best option, really? I just put that out there as a thought.
Yeah, thank you, because I ain't gonna answer that. Because yeah, we are working with we work very closely with Swansea University, who have a wildfire sort of academic arm of the geography department, and they do an awful lot of work all over the world and input into the discussions. And you know, I would really encourage you, if you haven't already, to get in touch with them. They've got some really fantastic research going on, and they, you know, they are looking into those sort of things and how certain vegetations burn and you know, a whole myriad of different research. So you know, those gaps and that understanding is really essential. You know, as you say, for large landscapes to not have prescribed burning in the toolkit is going to make certain, you know, certain landscapes just, you can't do it. You cannot manage that sort of scale. So, you know, that will be a very viable tool to use in the long term. But it's about, you know, training, about working very closely with the fire service to ensure that, you know, we are really you know, doing things right, and we aren't making additional risks. Is about fire plans. It's about, you know, sort of knowing the sites and things like that, which I know you know already. You know, there's something that my colleague Harv in particular has been working on is wildfire in Wales. So really bringing people together on that sort of thing. So that might, you know, that's one of the topics of conversation which we can sort of push towards that. Graham, you've got something else you want to say as well?
No, just coming back on those points you're saying, I think, you know, I'm not really an advocate for or against. I see a place for a prescribed burning, primarily small scale in appropriate situations. One thing that we haven't mentioned really is the wildfire, the grass and heather and grass burning regs in Wales. And I think Wales was really ahead of England in terms of having very clear specification for the use of fire as management in those circumstances. And I think bringing that guidance and good practice forward is really critical, and enforcing where it isn't put in place when you have so-called control burns getting out of control. Because the guidance is really clear in Wales and has been for a long time, and that includes, you know, not burning on peat. So I think there is, you know, some really good guidance in Wales for using fire as a management tool. But I think it's a combination of these things, and I think training, as you say, is really important. We got a generation that haven't used fire; those skills have been lost. And need to be sort of retaught, relearned, and new ways as well, new approaches.
Yeah, completely, and sort of making sure that Welsh Government, you know, as the holders of that guidance are at the table is really, really important. You know, where can it be improved, you know, and all that sort of thing, and learning lessons from other places. You know, you say that it's clear, and I agree there's clarity there. There are examples, I think in Ireland in particular, they've gone very, very strict on this, you know, where basically, you know, people are at fault whether or not they had anything to do with it. It's, you know, I don't advocate going that strong, but there are lessons to be learned on how other nations are looking at it as well. And, you know, as per my very original sort of thing, where I sort of said, you know, we are being forewarned by Southern Europe and Australia and America to say, you know, this is a massive challenge for you. So, you know, in the future, so we need to take heed from them. So what steps have they made so they can give us a bit of a sort of a jump up on how we deal with this in the future. Running out of time. So what I'm going to do is just skip forward to, sorry, bear with me. So, very, very briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of greatest challenges in wildfire management. This is a poll. It's a word cloud, sorry. So if someone could magically put that up for me, that would be fantastic. So I encourage you all to sort of where you feel that the greatest challenges are, you know, and we will, as I say, all this information is being used to inform our wider thinking as well. And then, you know, we've seen a lot of sort of challenges in trying to deliver our own sites. I wanted to go into this a bit more detail. I don't have time to do it now, but you know, whether it just be the gradient, that photograph there of it's not an exaggeration of how steep that hillside is. So like, how do you you know, that is somewhere where you can't, you know, do certain types of management. So, you know, and then we had fencing materials stolen when we were putting the fencing up. We are getting grazing on that site. You know, there are so many different things we've put in high binoculars because we recognize that reptiles are really important on that site. You know, we've got a big community in there. So there are lots and lots of challenges. One of the key things which, you know, I think I want to bring to the table straight away is funding. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier on, wildfire is, you know, set to increase with climate change. We are in a nature emergency where, you know, and Graham, as you mentioned, you know, SFS is coming out. You know, how do we make sure that the wildfire is considered in SFS? Because it is about a land management sort of thing. You know, we need to sort of consider all these sort of challenges. This is a bid for funded project. You know, we run out of funding in a couple of months' time. So, you know, once this is gone, how does anybody, you know, continue the discussion about wildfire. Whose responsibility is it? That's where that sort of question comes into it. I don't know the answer. So, you know, what I want to seek to do and the recommendations that we will be making as part of this toolkit is that wildfire is considered in its, you know, as a core funded element, and it should be considered as part of our climate change adaptation. So my last sort of question really is, will you consider wildfire as part of conservation management? This is my last sort of polls here. So will you consider that? You know, having heard this, or, you know, please get in touch with myself and the wider team. Would you, the other question then is, you know, would you be interested in a practical demonstration and training event on prescribed burning and other wildfire prevention measures? This is something we've been considering. It's something which has been cropping up as part of our work around designated sites and other things where, you know, people have real concerns about prescribed burning. So we were really going to open up that sort of discussion in the field with fire officers to sort of really look at it. So I'm really trying to gauge appetite on whether that is something that people would like to see. And then really just to say thank you very much for listening to me. Very poor at keeping on track of time. So yeah, thank you for contributing, and everything will be used in our wider project. So thank you very much. If anyone does want to get in touch with any of us, here's the project officers, the project teams, email addresses. We also have the Healthy Hillsides at naturalresourceswales.gov.uk to get in touch, ask any questions or get involved in any way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Becky. That was really valuable and important discussion, and the risk is only going to increase, isn't it? So biodiversity planners, practitioners, community engagers all need to be up to speed and taking this on board. So thank you for that. Really useful discussion as well at the end there. Okay, so this ends our morning session for the conference on Human Needs Are Met. We reconvene at 1:30 with a session on urban communities taking action for nature recovery and improving biodiversity. So hope you'll join us back then, but enjoy your lunch in the meantime. Thank you, everyone.